After I finished MGS5 in 2015, I realized that Hideo Kojima wasn't the genius that everybody thinks he is. I tried my best to give him the benefit of the doubt, but the more objectively I looked at his work, the more disgusted I was by the way he approaches storytelling. 10 years later, I've come to oppose everything that he stands for. Overinflated budgets, maximal cutscenes with minimal gameplay, mass layoffs. It all traces back to him. And if you think I'm exaggerating, you probably don't see the Kojima credit card as a dystopian nightmare like I do. Normally, I don't allow Kojabberwocky's name anywhere on this channel, but I'm making an exception for this video and the theatrical release that came before it, because this situation is bigger than my personal vendetta. A lot of people out there think you should separate the art from the artist, but when people say this phrase, what they really mean is you should separate your brains from everything. Separate the art from the artist is a convenient phrase used to discourage critical thinking, so people never have to come to terms with the fact that they might be part of the problem. Then there are people who say things like Japan is inherently racist and misogynistic, but the only reason people have that perception is because people keep saying things like separate the art from the artist. And they say these things because if people started calling out terrible behavior like I'm about to, they'd be forced to look at themselves in the mirror. And if there's one thing that racists, misogynists, and PDF files despise more than anything, it's self-reflection. There are more things that I dislike about the way Kojima does business than I can reasonably cover in this video, especially the way he takes credit for other people's work. But I'm not going to talk about those things because they don't concern me anywhere near as much as the other things that make him and his supporters an absolute dumpster fire of human indecency. My first problem is with Sniper Wolf, a blonde-haired, blue-eyed woman from the Kurdistan region of Iraq. Now, to be fair, there are in fact Kurdish people who look like Sniper Wolf. And apparently I need to say that again because I constantly underestimate how stupid Metal Gear fans can be. Kurdish people who look like Sniper Wolf do exist. However, Kurdish people who look 100% European like she does are in the vast minority. In order to find a Kurdish woman who looks like this, you have to ignore all the ones who don't. So even though Kurdish people with blonde hair and blue eyes do exist, there's a systemic history of creators replacing black and brown-skinned people with Europeans, so it's still racial discrimination to make a fictional Kurdish character who looks like that. Obviously though, the character design in a big-budget video game is a collaborative effort between the director and the art team. And as we all know, but some of us are more hesitant to admit, Kojalibi wouldn't even have a career if it wasn't for Yoji Shinkawa. In an interview with Ignorant Garbage News, Shinkawa described his creative process. With Sniper Wolf, Kojima actually asked for a guy, but then I said, what do you think about a young lady with a sniper rifle? And he was like, oh great, let's do that. So there are times when I come up with my own ideas or my own characters to put in the game. I don't come up with any of the lines or how they actually speak. My job is to make illustrations that inspire Mr. Kojima. From that, you might think that Shinkawa should share some of the blame for drawing Sniper Wolf that way, but that's not how it works. As the director, Kojima has final say over every decision made during production, and when something goes catastrophically wrong, it's the captain's job to go down with the ship. Unfortunately, something did go catastrophically wrong in Metal Gear Solid. There was another character besides Sniper Wolf that looked distinctly European, despite coming from a country where the majority of people aren't European. The only way this could have happened was if Kojima saw the character designs first and then wrote their backstories afterwards without doing any research, assuming he even wrote any of the character backstories in the first place. On the Japanese website for Metal Gear Solid, Naomi Hunter is described as a beautiful scientist with brown skin, which is just surreal to read for so many reasons. Like, why is her skin color even mentioned in her character bio? She's the only character who's described like that on the website. But the absolute strangest thing about Naomi Hunter is that ain't a damn thing about this woman that could even be interpreted as suntanned, let alone brown-skinned. It feels like whoever wrote Naomi's character bio had to include that line because if they didn't, everybody would assume she's 100% European. And that's exactly what everybody did assume until she dropped this line later in the game.
I was found in Rhodesia sometime in the 80s. A dirty little orphan.
Rhodesia? What's now known as Zimbabwe?
Yes. Rhodesia was owned by England until 1965, and there were lots of Indian laborers around. That's probably where I got my skin color from, but I'm not even sure about that.
Quick question. What skin color? There's not a single person on the planet who would ever guess that this character had any Indian in their DNA. In the game, Naomi explains that she was found in Rhodesia, an African country whose population was 93% African. At the time Naomi mentions, less than 1% of the population originated from Asia, but the idea that she might be part black never crossed her mind. No, in her eyes, being part Indian was more probable. In a different interview with GameSpot about the design process, Yoji Shinkawa explained that it doesn't take a lot of time to create male characters, but female characters can take months before Kojima's satisfied. Shinkawa adds, "To be honest, I think characters like Rose and Naomi are Mr. Kojima's ideal women. But they're not my ideal women. You know, Mr. Kojima likes those intelligent scientist types." I could read into that more deeply and say Kojima's ideal brown-skinned woman is actually white, but I'm gonna keep it moving because admittedly, Sniper Wolf and Naomi Hunter seem accidental. Those two characters alone aren't enough for me to call Kojima a racist with conviction. Raiden, on the other hand, is a completely different story. Raiden by himself is enough for me to call Kojima a racist beyond any shadow of a doubt. Raiden just might be the most racist creation in video game history. The character's from Liberia, a country whose population has been over 99% people of African descent from the very beginning. In 1989, when Raiden first fought as a child soldier, finding a needle in a Liberian haystack would have been 100 times easier than finding somebody who looked like him. But that's not even the problem. The problem is the decision to reference the country of Liberia in the first place. See, Liberia was founded in the 1800s as a country for black people hoping to escape enslavement and segregation in the United States. So back in the day when a Klansman told a black dude to go back to Africa, sometimes they did. Unfortunately, the Liberian settlers based their new government on the same country they were trying to get away from, and they wound up repeating the same atrocities against the native population that America did. This resulted in the natives revolting against their oppressors in the Liberian Civil War, one of the most horrific conflicts the African continent has ever seen. In the modern day, conditions in Liberia are improving, but because Europeans ransacked all of Africa for hundreds of years, progress hasn't been as quick as it should be. One of the things holding Liberia back is its own bloody history, which, I'll remind you, was the result of people seeking life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness after being denied those rights in the so-called Land of the Free. Liberia's entire existence is directly tied to the oppression of black people, and its citizens are still dealing with the aftermath of the country's founding and the wars that followed. But Raiden is divorced from all of that. He's a tourist, except he travels light, because he carries absolutely none of Liberia's historical baggage. Out of all the countries to put in a character's tragic origin story, using Liberia specifically as a catalyst for the development of somebody who looks like Raiden is just some bullshit. That's the only way I can describe it. Because if Raiden had been a child soldier in Eastern Europe or something, the story would have been the exact same. And it would have been a hell of a lot more believable. So why in the hell would you do something so fucking brain dead as to put a country whose entire existence revolves around black identity in the backstory of a character who looks like Owen Wilson and Meg Ryan had a miscarriage?
What your ass say?
Some people might say that Raiden isn't an example of whitewashing because the games directly reference his skin color, like in Metal Gear Rising where Jack the Ripper's appearance gets called out by Mistral.
Liberian, but white as snow.
That scene doesn't count though because Kojima didn't write or direct Rising, so none of his fanboys regard it as canon. Kojima does mention the discrepancy in MGS2 though. Towards the end of the game, Solidus explains that Raiden was so effective as a child killer, he earned the nickname White Devil. But that just means Kojima was aware that Raiden's skin color made him an anomaly in an African country. And the fact that the politics of Liberia aren't relevant to the story means there's no good reason for it to be there. Kojima tried to use the Liberian Civil War as window dressing to make himself look more well-versed in the ways of the world than he actually is, but his plan backfired. The thing that makes Kojima so morally bankrupt here is the fact that he put Liberia in Raiden's backstory after the character design was finalized, just like what he did with Naomi Hunter and Sniper Wolf. In 1999, just a couple of months after MGS1 came out, Kojima finished his grand game plan for MGS Roman numeral 3, the original title for MGS2. Originally, Raiden's tragic origin story involved having to put his father out of his misery after a gun accidentally went off during a hunting trip, but at some point, Kojima changed his mind. In the same GameSpot interview I mentioned before, Shinkawa explained that his first sketch for Raiden wound up being pretty close to how he looked in the final game. So after Kojima changed Raiden's backstory, why didn't he ask for the character design to be revised? Why was Kojima so confident that Shinkawa got it right on the first try? Apparently, after MGS1 was released, Kojarjar decided that the next game in the series needed to appeal to young girls. I can only imagine why. Whatever the case may be, his team surveyed a group of young women who don't normally play video games. One middle school student, who again, didn't even like video games in the first place, said she hated games where you play as stupid old men. The team was apparently so devastated by this little girl's response that MGS2 was made just for her. I say apparently because I don't believe for a second that a single girl in middle school had more influence on MGS2 than the millions of Metal Gear Solid fans across the world who were eagerly anticipating a sequel. I'd bet anything that the entire story is another flat-out lie. Just like when Kojakass said they could have made the graphics in PT look even better, but they had to tone it down because people wouldn't believe that it was made by an independent studio. Or when he said that he doesn't put Asian characters in his games because Asian skin is so difficult to render. The only reason I'm even bringing this up is because several people mentioned it as a counter-argument in the first version of this video. That's undeniable proof that not only will the members of the Kojima cult believe anything he tells them, but he can straight up lie to their faces, and they'll call him a genius for it. Putting Liberia in Raiden's backstory? Pretty stupid, but Kojima did technically acknowledge in the script that Liberians don't typically look like that. It'd be another thing entirely if Kojima wrote a blonde-haired, blue-eyed character who was embraced and accepted as a native citizen of a predominantly brown-skinned country. And that's exactly what he did. In the opening to Peace Walker, we're introduced to Paz Ortega Andrade, someone who we're told is a 16-year-old high school student from Costa Rica. Paz turned out to be a double agent in her 20s, and in the story, this is treated as if it's supposed to be a big surprise. But for everybody with 2 functioning brain cells, that really broke their suspension of disbelief, because they had been suspicious of this girl being Costa Rican from the second she showed up in promotional material. Let me be clear, I don't care if there are people in Costa Rica who actually look like this, and Paz being from America is completely irrelevant. She's still introduced as a Costa Rican citizen, so her character design is racially biased against the majority of Costa Ricans. But Peace Walker didn't stop there, not by a long shot. Later on in the game, the player meets Amanda and her younger brother Chico, freedom fighters from Nicaragua who look absolutely nothing like freedom fighters from Nicaragua. Whenever I meet somebody from Costa Rica, I ask if I can show them a video game character from their country, because I want to know if they think the character's a good ambassador for their culture. People are always excited to give their thoughts too, and before I can show them anything, you can tell from the hopeful smiles on their faces that they're picturing a character that they can be proud of in their heads. Then I show them a picture of Paz, and every single time, that hope is immediately drained from their eyes. Sometimes I find myself in a room with several people from various parts of Central and South America. I'll show them this picture and ask them to tell me what country they think this kid's from. Most people say Ireland, a couple people say Germany, but no one has ever guessed that he's from a Spanish-speaking country. Not once. And if the people from the country that a character's supposed to represent don't think the character represents that country, that means somebody didn't do any research when they signed off on the character design and wrote their backstory. And anybody who thinks they should be allowed to portray a culture they've never had any exposure to is human garbage. Again, I do not care if there are people in Central America who actually look like this. The majority of people do not. And if you have an opportunity to create a black or brown-skinned character from a country where it would be perfectly logical for you to do so, but you choose to make them look European instead, you are a terrible person.
Now back it up there, Mr. YouTube lore keeper man. Is you just fixing to ignore all them goddamn colors Kojima done put in them there video games? Cause I don't know about you, but the DARPA chief look a whole hell of a lot like that DEI, DRM, IBS, or whatever you liberals are always hollering about. I tell you what.
That reminds me of something I saw a while back. Somebody said Decoy Octopus should be canceled for doing blackface. Oh, man.
Whoa, is that fucking blackface, dude?
Anyway, what was I talking about? Oh yeah, Kojima's a racist. Look, even if Kojima created bullshit characters like Raiden and Paz, there are still a ton of dark-skinned characters throughout the Metal Gear series. And against all odds, not a single one of them acts like an offensive stereotype. Let me tell you something, there are plenty of other creators who can't make that claim. So how can I accuse somebody of being racist when they've clearly demonstrated their ability to respectfully include people of different racial and cultural backgrounds in their games? Excellent question. Here's how. Creating a minority character that isn't offensive doesn't counteract a minority character who is. You think writing a brown-skinned character properly earns you a get-out-of-racial prejudice-free card that you can use to undo a separate fuck-up? I assure you, it does not. Metal Gear could have been one of the most diverse and inclusive franchises of all time, but if there was even a single character like Paz, I'd have a couple questions. The fact that Kojima did that shit at least 4 other times? That makes him a chronic and repeat offender. That being said, the argument that a Japanese person shouldn't be held to the same standards as someone from a Western country would be valid if Kojima's games weren't marketed primarily in North America. Listen, diplomatic immunity doesn't apply here. If someone commits a crime on foreign soil, they don't go free just because it's not illegal in the country they came from. So if you don't want to deal with Western criticism, don't sell your game in Western markets. Also, last time I checked, Kojima's a grown-ass man. He's fully capable of understanding the concept of racial discrimination in other countries. And we know for a fact that he does understand it because of this line from Miller Lite in MGS1.
The head of the FBI at that time, Edgar Hoover, he was a well-known racist. Didn't Naomi say that her father was Japanese?
Even if this line came from his writing assistant, Tomokazu Fukushima, that's proof that someone born in Japan was able to overcome their country's isolationist ideals. To even suggest that Kojima shouldn't know better is like denying him of his bodily autonomy. And given how many members of his cult are a bunch of inbred hillbilly pro-lifer morons, I guess I shouldn't be surprised.
Now what in the hell does skin color matter anyhow? I believe it was Martin Luther King who done said judge people based on the content of they's character, not the color of they's potato skins, I tell you what.
The fact of the matter is, people want to see themselves in the media they consume. Anybody who says they don't already looks like most video game protagonists. Or they're trying to be accepted by the people who look like most video game protagonists, and we've all seen how ugly that gets. See, most white people, and all wannabe white people, oppose the concept of diversity and inclusion because they just don't see the point. Since they've been conditioned to see white men as normal, and everybody else as abnormal, they think the white experience applies to everybody.
Well, make your own goddamn video game if you care about it so much.
Except, whenever somebody does, a wannabe white dude from Brazil adds it to a list. Then the makers of that game get bombarded with death threats. I see people in the comments all the time saying you should be able to relate to a character regardless of what they look like, but they only feel that way when the character is a white male. When a game makes you play as a woman or a black person, heavens forbid, oh, well, would you look at that? More death threats. And yet, whenever this happens, the same white people who say skin color shouldn't matter are strangely silent. What's that about, I wonder? As most people should be aware in this day and age, Hollywood has a troubled history of giving Europeans roles that should have been played by brown-skinned actors. And for decades, people have been calling film studios out for having the ability to cast underrepresented actors and choosing not to. You'd think that a person whose body is supposedly 70% movies would know that.
Now what about race-swapping characters who done started out whiter than bird shit? If and you ask me, that's just as bad. I tell you what.
No, it's not just as bad. The same way it's always moral to pirate Adobe software, changing a white character into a black one, or a male character into a woman, is always the right thing to do. And here's why. Whenever you see it happen, it's usually because of white males telling a child that they can't dress up as their favorite character for Halloween. Or it's in direct response to all the hateful comments that black women receive on their cosplay photos.
Hinata isn't black, Hinata isn't black, Hinata isn't black, Hinata isn't black.
She gon' be black today, she gon' be black today, she gon' be black today, she gon' be black today.
You goddamn right. Cause ain't nobody got shit to say when a white lady dresses up as a Japanese character, but when a black woman does it, then it's a problem all of a sudden. The funny part about all this is that European characters keep getting race swapped because white people keep complaining about European characters getting race swapped. Now that's what I call social justice. Not a lot of people have called Kojima out on his downright racist creative decisions, but how that guy feels about women has been well documented for decades. I shouldn't even need to mention what happens to Paz in Ground Zeroes. But the point of this video isn't to be a comprehensive breakdown of every bad decision Kojima's ever made. I'm trying to add new information that I never see people talk about. There are all kinds of examples I can bring up that would make you want to go up to Kojima and say, dude, what the hell were you thinking? But the one that bothers me the most is Police Knots, a point-and-click adventure game where you play as Jonathan Ingram, private investigator by day, sexual predator by all the fucking time, apparently. In Police Knots, when you talk to almost all of the female characters, Jonathan will comment on the woman's figure if you click certain body parts, out loud, to her face. And strangely, the women usually don't object to what Jonathan has to say. However, after you look at a woman's breasts, the touch command appears in your dialogue options. To be clear, the touch command is completely optional, but before recording this, I watched 10 different playthroughs of the game, and I didn't see a single person skip the option when it was available. Even people who vocally expressed how uncomfortable the situation made them. And that's because Police Knots is a lot like a hidden object game. You have to click on random background decorations so you can bring them up in conversation. Then you have to select the same dialogue option multiple times before the game allows you to progress. So unless you're using a strategy guide, there's no way to know what you're supposed to click to keep the story moving. Because of that, most first-time players click everywhere on the screen, then they wind up groping random women against their will when all they're trying to do is advance the plot.
Oh, come on, man, you over here making a mountain out of a molehill. It's just a joke.
That's exactly the problem. Kojima turned sexual assault into a joke. And guess what? Around half of the population isn't laughing. Not that anybody who defends a serial molester would have any experience with that half of the population. Oh, and if anybody wants to bring up that bullshit about Japan having different cultural values, no it doesn't. And you're an idiot if you think Japanese women find sexual assault to be funny. Entitled pieces of shit who think they have the right to help themselves to a woman's body is a major problem in Japan. It's such a problem that most train companies have cars just for women. And I learned that the hard way when I wasn't paying attention and got on one of these cars by accident. Women-only cars have been a thing in Japan since 1912 because so many women were getting assaulted on trains that the government had to intervene.
What, so a protagonist can't have no character flaws no more? Is that what you're saying?
Honestly, a story like that could work. Like, say there's this dude who has this inexplicable compulsion to molest women. It sounds horrible hearing me say it out loud, but just look at American Psycho. Patrick Bateman is a million times worse than a dude who can't stop copping a feel, and that story's a masterpiece. What would make it work as a flaw is if the protagonist was forced to face any sort of consequences. At all. Or in the case of American Psycho, the lack of consequences is commentary about the flaws of society. Yeah, that doesn't happen in Police Knots. Every time the main character touches a woman without their consent, it's played for laughs. It never costs him any professional opportunities or personal relationships, and none of the women ever report him. Because who would they even report him to? The police? Knots? First of all, despite no longer being on the police force, Jonathan still wears his badge, so anybody meeting him for the first time would naturally assume that he is the police. Secondly, Jonathan's best friend Ed Brown actually is an active duty detective who watches Jonathan do it. And every time the dude molests somebody, the cop looks at him like a sitcom dad who just caught him with his hands in the cookie jar. Like he just shrugs and says something endearing like, "Well, that's our Jonathan for you." Oh, Jonathan. At one point in the game, Officer Brown invites Jonathan over for dinner, and they're greeted by Brown's 16-year-old daughter who, for whatever reason, walks around the house in her gymnastics uniform. When everybody sits down to eat, Jonathan preys on this little girl like a vulture. While sitting directly across from her father, Jonathan says to the child that she looks more appetizing than the food on the table.
Now hold on just a goddamn twinkie-dink. Ain't the age of consent in Japan something like 13, 14, somewhere around them parts?
Nope. Nuh-uh. In 46 out of 47 prefectures, it's been 18 since the 80s. So to everybody out there whose parents aren't blood related, if you ever see somebody with this guy as their profile pic, run the fuck away. Because here's how that dinner scene should have played out, which I'm sure you'll agree is strikingly well cast.
She is 16 years old. What is wrong with you? That little girl is a child. I don't want to see you sniffing around her anymore this afternoon. Do you understand? Yes, sir. Boy, have you lost your mind, because I'll help you find it.
I don't know about you, right? But me personally, I think it's a major problem when people constantly shower this game with praise instead of adding it to the disgustingly long list of Japanese games that allow you to play as someone who shouldn't be allowed within 200 feet of a school. But why am I bringing all this up now, over 30 years since Police Knots was first released? And you know what? You're absolutely right. So let's look at some more recent examples of Kojima being a massive piece of shit. Let me tell you why I will never play any of the Death Stranding games. In the first game, there's a scene where Higgs, the main bad guy, makes the love interest, Fragile, strip down to her underwear as punishment for trying to stop him from blowing up a heavily populated city. So Fragile's made to get on her knees while she's surrounded by men who point assault rifles at her head. Then they just stare at her for like a ridiculous amount of time. After the men have had their fill, Higgs tells Fragile that if she wants to stop the city from being destroyed, she'll have to run through timefall, rain that causes everything it touches to age rapidly. And that's exactly what she does. The scene goes into slow motion as sad music plays in the background to really drive the point home that she's sacrificing her supple young skin for the greater good. It's disgusting. Not just Kojima's decision to rob a woman of her dignity and sexualize her public humiliation, but the gratuitous way that the scene is shot. The slow motion and the sad music, that was about the men in the audience losing their desire to see Lea Seydoux in her underwear. It had nothing to do with the woman that was being tortured on screen. Horrifyingly enough though, that's not even close to the most misogynistic thing that happens in Death Stranding. So, in order to see ghosts in the world of Death Stranding, you need a device called a bridge baby. A bridge baby is a premature fetus that was extracted via C-section from its still mother, a woman who went brain dead during pregnancy. I'm not done. Go throw up if you have to, then sit your ass back down. We're not even at the bad part yet. Since a still mother and her unborn fetus exist in a state between life and death, if you put the fetus in a special jar that simulates the conditions of a still mother's womb, the two can act as a bridge between the worlds of the living and the dead. The thing about a bridge baby is that it's treated as ghost detecting equipment. It doesn't have any human rights because it's not considered a human being, which is why I referred to it as a device.
You should remember that BBs are just equipment. Try not to get attached.
And when a bridge baby stops being useful, protocol dictates that it be disposed of by cremation. How does a bridge baby stop being useful, you ask? Oh, they just, become old enough to start forming memories. Duh. But what about the still mother? If they're no longer hooked up to a bridge baby, are they supposed to be disposed of too? Apparently not, because still mothers can be connected to any bridge baby, not just their biological child. In other words, brain-dead women can be recycled as surrogate still mothers. Meanwhile, it's never established whether the families of these women agreed to any of this, because all the characters in the game are fully aware that this is happening, but no one ever talks about it. So no one ever mentions whether the American government is making pregnant women go brain-dead on purpose, just so the Pony Express of the future can see ghosts. As if that wasn't enough, you never see the still mothers in Death Stranding. They don't even have names. And why would they when people talk about these women the same way a farmer talks about livestock? Like I said, I haven't played the game and I never will, because I honestly can't think of a work of fiction that disrespects women worse than Death Stranding. and I saw the first episode of The Handmaid's Tale. Oh shit, I just remembered that the Death Stranding Collector's Edition came with a replica bridge baby. That's the most misogynistic promotional item since Dead Island gave people a half-naked woman's mutilated headless corpse. So when it comes to writing women, it turns out Kojima's worse than ever in the Death Stranding games, and I didn't even talk about the woman who has a disease that causes her to remain 7 months pregnant for multiple years. But in the name of being fair, at least Kojima learned from his past mistakes and didn't do anything racist, right? Wrong. In Death Stranding 2, Kojima took die-hardman, the only black character from the first game, and turned him into a porcelain white robot with blue eyes. It's stupid because the game even shows that they could have projected Tommy Earl Jenkins' face onto the robot, but then he goes back to looking like this. This might actually be more offensive than Raiden and all the other characters I mentioned, because unlike them, Kojima didn't write a fictional character who could have been black, he took a person who is black and then deleted all of his identifying features. As a matter of fact, Kojima did the exact same thing in Death Stranding 1. Right up until the final moments of that game's story, die-hardman wears a mask that hides his identity. Whether it was intentional or not, Kojima prevented a black man's face from being seen in 2 of his games in a row. I don't care if die-hardman comes back at the end of Death Stranding 2. He still spends most of the game as a blue eyes white robot. I don't care if it was for narrative purposes either. There's no reason why the 4 writers who worked on the game couldn't have written a story where die-hardman looks like himself the whole time. But what about the actor who plays die-hardman? If Tommy Earl Jenkins thought the robot was offensive, wouldn't he just refuse to play the character? So if he doesn't have a problem, why should I? Because that's not how contracts work. If an actor says or does anything that paints a production company in a bad light, they get labeled hard to work with, making other companies reluctant to hire them. And since Tommy Earl Jenkins might not be at liberty to criticize Kojima's writing for fear of losing his job, I'll do it. Oh, and can somebody please explain to me why Death Stranding 2 has no Mexican characters in the part of the game that takes place in Mexico? So yeah, if you really thought Kojima had gotten any less racist or misogynistic in recent years, then I'm hoping that you just figured out where your blind spots are. At some point in this video, it should have been painfully obvious that this was never about hidey hole Kojingle bells. The real target of this video is you. Most of the idiots in the audience took the bait and are currently getting banned as you're listening to this, so now that I've had my fun, it's time to get serious. I understand that Kojima's creative decisions are a byproduct of Western colonialism, but just because he's also a victim of Eurocentrism, that doesn't mean that we should ignore him every time he does something stupid. It would be a dream come true if somebody finally made Kojima aware of all the terrible mistakes he's made, but I'm a nobody. Jumpin' Jack's never gonna see this video, and that's mostly because he never sees commentary from the public unless it's been approved by Jeff Keighley beforehand. I know exactly how pretentious it is to call myself the Metal Gear lore keeper, and that was intentional. It's a pretentious title for a pretentious series of games. But there are people out there who proudly and unironically call themselves Hideo Kojima historians, which has gotta be the absolute most pathetic thing I've ever seen in my life. Because that level of hero worship acts as a force field that deflects criticism, to the point that the stupider Kojima's creative decisions get, the more his cult of a fan base worships him as a god. That's the reason why there's about to be a Kojima credit card. Then other game directors see that and assume that that's what success looks like, leading to even more so-called auteurs like David Cage, Neil Druckmann, Cory Barlog, and Sam Lake. Yeah, you heard me, Sam Lake's in there too. Cause all those guys are trying to follow in Kojima's footsteps by making a $200 million blockbuster movie instead of a game. If that game does well, then Jeff Keighley gives the director all the credit at the next Game Awards. But if that game fails to meet sales expectations, then all the people who actually made the game lose their fucking jobs. So how do we put a stop to this? Am I suggesting that people stop playing the Metal Gear games? Hell no. We need people to support MGS now more than ever, so that Konami knows they don't need some hotshot director to sell their games. And believe it or not, I want you to get hyped for OD and Fizzint too, because those games are being made by hundreds of extremely talented people, and their hard work deserves to be seen. What we need to do is change the perception that these games were made by a single person. And I see a lot of you out there put Clippy in your profile pics, so if you're down for some more slacktivism, here's the battle plan. Anytime you're watching a video, or you see a post about Metal Gear, Death Stranding, OD, or Fizzint, just drop this comment. All the artists and programmers really did an incredible job on this game. The point behind this is simply to remind people that these games wouldn't be possible without the skills of hundreds, if not thousands of creators. If more people could remember that would eventually break down the criticism force field, making it possible to finally let Kojima and his fans know that people aren't going to keep tolerating all the racism, misogyny, and pedophilia.